This is Bobby Longer talk about the early days of Porsche. He was one of the founding members of the Porsche Club, which was just a group of guys, and it was two other guys getting together, forming a get-together. And then it turned out to be every 2 weeks at his house, and it turned out to be every weekend because the guys were so enthusiastic. So Bobby has got a wealth of knowledge on the early stuff. I find it interesting. I mean, to me, it's like heaven listening to all this stuff and seeing the photos. So if you can all please welcome Bobby Longer.
First of all, two things I just want to say. What I'm talking about happened a hell of a long time ago, close to 60 years. So I might not be that accurate. Second of all, a lot of the photos that you're going to see were taken with I don't know what you call them, a Kodak box camera. So they're not going to be the quality that you've just seen now. Right, a couple of years ago, as Werner rightly said, he contacted me as he was doing research on the very famous 550 Spider, which was owned and raced by Davy Gous. And for anybody who wants to see what he looks like, there he is sitting in his next car, which was the Elva Porsche. The 550 was raced very, very successfully and participated in many 9-hour races and other Springbok Series races. Werner's passion for the history of this old car was quite evident. When I showed him photos in my album, he happened to notice various other Porsche photos which I had owned. I had to explain in detail about these cars, and I was quite taken aback that somebody from a much younger generation would be so interested in these old car stories. He's asked me to relay some of these stories for you this morning. So first of all, I want to say my interest and love for Porsches all started at the inaugural meeting at the new Kyalami circuit in 1961, November. The race meeting was the Rand Daily Mail 9-hour, and I was very fortunate to have a seat in the main grandstand, which is right across from the pits. So shortly before the race was due to start, as is tradition, the cars are wheeled out from behind the pit wall to form up in the traditional Le Mans start. The second car to emerge was a silver Porsche Spider. The first car was the Jaguar D-Type. I remember thinking what a stunningly beautiful car it was. And then later on, the fact that this was so competitive, even though it was less than half the capacity of some of the other motor cars. Fast forward a few years. Have you got a picture of the Spider for me? No, the one where I'm sitting in it. There we go. So fast forward a few years to 1965. On one of my weekend passes from the army in Pretoria, I visited a good buddy of mine, Paul Chester, who already worked as an Appy motor mechanic at Lindsay Saker. I was completely shocked as there in his driveway was that self-same 550. Paul and his brother Mervyn, incidentally, when they raced this car, they used the surname Richards, which was, I think, his mother's first husband. The two had bought this Spider, having tracked it down to a used car lot in Vereniging. Can you believe that? In those times, old racing cars had absolutely no value whatsoever.
Bobby, can you see the hinge on that door?
And the door, yeah, that's different. That's what the next kitchen cupboard.
Look, I like it when people notice things and ask questions. This car was raced obviously 61, 62, God knows how many years. The last owner had a horrendous accident with it. It caught fire somewhere around the track. I'm not sure what the guy's name was. And if you just put the next slide on, don't I look very proud in that spider there? Just while you're looking at this first slide, you'll see the young fellow that lost his life sitting in that Beetle cabriolet. This youngster was a hothead of note. I mean, the way he used to drive that cabriolet in Joburg was ludicrous.
Bobby, can you please tell us the story with the tram lines?
Yeah, one of his big jokes was to drive down Oxford Road in Joburg. I don't know how many of you are from Joburg. We're talking about the 60s now. Hardly any traffic, but Rosebank was the only sort of, let's call it shopping area outside of the CBD. He put the top down and we all ducked down out of sight. And he steered the car by looking at the trolley wires overhead. So we did a drive-by past the people in Rosebank, and it looked as though obviously nobody was at the wheel. Give us the next one. If you look at the bottom right-hand corner, you can see that is not the nose of a 550. The whole front end was obviously wrecked, burnt, who knows. And that entire front end with that hinge that Frans noticed was rebuilt by somebody. But the rear part, as you can see in the bottom left, the rear part was still aluminium. Okay, so over the next few months, the brothers prepared the car as they wanted to go racing. And whenever I had a weekend pass, I helped whenever I could. In 1966, I moved up to Joburg. I lived in Durban and was able to assist more often and accompany them to Kyalami on Saturday mornings, where I think it was the Sports Car Club used to have their sort of official testing sessions. Am I right, Frans? Open day or whatever it was. And the photos that you're looking at there are from one of those open days. The top left-hand corner, how the hell he got the car up onto that bank like that, nobody knew. But that bank, as you can see from the fellow standing there, is probably close to 1.5 meters high. And that car wasn't damaged at all. It is sitting on its spider exhaust, which is something that looks like that. An incident that sticks out in my mind there is a fellow by the name of Dave Charlton, who was one of the hotties at the time, who was practicing in one of his Formula One cars, came up the hill. Remember, this is at the top of Leerkop. He came up the hill and stopped. And he said, "What has that little arsehole done now?" So later that year, they decided they were ready to enter a club meeting. I missed this as I was back working in Durban. Unfortunately, Paul, I'm led to believe that he fluffed the start. So all the competitors had gone, and he obviously tried a little bit too hard. He lost control of the car in the Yixkay sweep, which I don't think it exists anymore. The car mounted the bank pretty much as high as that one and wrapped itself around a steel pole which was holding up a Shell sign. Sadly, he lost his life.
Bobby, did that car have drum brakes?
Drum brakes, yes.
That's the disc brakes.
Man?
Only drum brakes those days.
Vintage drums.
But bigger ones. Wider ones. Wider brakes.
Sorry, France, they had triplex brakes, didn't they? With
That's
3 shoes.
No.
No.
Only very wide shoes.
Just very wide. They were about 60 millimeters wide, if I remember correctly. Anybody else notice anything? No. Okay. So the car was trailered to Wynberg and Joburg, back to the yard of the construction company that his stepfather ran. This company was Concor, a big construction company. I don't know if they exist anymore. Shortly after this, Mervyn came to me and he said, please come. I want to strip some stuff out of this car before the old man buries it. Because he'd asked his staff to dig a big hole. You know, he had access to these back actors and front end loaders. He didn't want Mervyn to race this car anymore. So he told him to dig this hole. And Mervyn and I snuck in there at night. We took out the nice bits, which was the motor, the gearbox. We took out the steering wheel. And quite significantly, just look at those wheels there. Those are Dunlop Racing, obviously. The wheels are, although they look like standard 356 wheels, they are aluminium. No, they're not wider. They're definitely not wider. I think they're 5.5 inch. But the rims are aluminium. The steels are centers. That was the racing rim of the time in the Porsche. Hello?
Can I interrupt you? Those are 15-inch wheels.
Correct.
That car was delivered to Derby with 16-inch wheels, but they didn't have, Dunlop only had racing cars in 15. And the 3 rims up here on the wall here, those were the rims that came with the car. Those 3 rims.
Yes.
Those are 16-inch aluminium rims. And they were delivered, and then immediately afterwards, Derby wanted the 15-inch Dunlop tires, and he asked Al Gibson to replace them with these wheels. And eventually, Werner got that from Al Gibson, those 3 up there. We need the 4th one.
That's in England, yeah.
So, I don't know how many people know, but Porsche made well over 100 of these Spiders. And when they were delivered new, they even had hubcaps on them. Moon hubcaps, as anybody who drives an A series will know. The only difference is the hubcaps were made out of aluminium, not steel. Where am I here? So, while we were stripping the car, I asked Mervyn if I could buy those 4 wheels. I thought they would look quite snazzy, because by this time I also owned a VW Cabriolet. Now, I don't know if you can see what is written on that tire there. Oh, there. It says Dunlop Racing. Now, although the rims were 5.5 inch, the tires, as you can see, were ballooning out. So this looked like one seriously hot car. And one has to remember that in those years, the concept of wide wheels on road cars was unheard of. So wherever I parked, people were kneeling on the ground trying to see what engine this car had underneath it. Of course, the Dunlop racing tires, not designed for the road at all, very, very little rubber on them. So within a couple of 100 kilometers, I was down to the canvas. At that time, I didn't quite realize how special those wheels were. But thank God, when I sold this car, I hung on to the wheels and the hubcaps. So Mervyn, in the meantime, because he now had this 4-cam motor, he wanted to put it into a car, he bought himself a 356A. There it is, with all the bumpers on. I can't even remember how he put the louvers in the back there. And I've just noticed something. Can you see behind that's the hardtop which my green Speedster, which you will see coming up now, came with. It didn't have a soft top at all. Yes. So the two of us installed the 4-cam motor into this car. He was living in a real grotty little flat in Germiston. And actually, we did the installation at his father's place, which is in Beverley, which is in those years, a plot area of Johannesburg. And I remember when he finished the car and he needed to take it back to Germiston, he was driving and he did it at night because he had a Spider exhaust on it, which is this exhaust here. But that's a street version of a Spider exhaust. If you remember, the Spider was a mid-engine car, so this had the engine at the back. So this exhaust probably stuck out maybe half a meter, even more, from the back of the car. In any case, he was stopped by the police because they complained that he was making too much racket. Mervyn charmed them. He said, "Do you know that this motor is the motor that won the 9-hour with Davy Gous?" And you know, in those years, Davy Gous was an absolute hero in this country, the same way as A.B. de Villiers is today in cricket. So they waved him on. So Mervyn's 356 made me long to own one. And the opportunity came when I noticed a yellow 356 parked across the street from a girlfriend's house in Parkview. I got chatting to this guy who was willing to sell. I was a Porsche owner. This car was a 51 1100cc engine. As you can see, the windscreen resembled a Messerschmitt fighter plane. As the owner was unable to source the split glass, so you can see he made 2 flat planes in the middle and plexiglass to go around the slight bend on the edges. I kept the car for a while, but soon realized that compared to Mervyn's car, my car was very crude. The gearbox did not have synchro on all the gears, and the brakes were not at all good. And I'd like to tell you a story of what happened to me with those brakes. Again, I don't know how many people know Joburg, but Houghton Drive, going up Houghton Drive, close to the top, it veers off to the left as well as going straight up to Louis Botha. And the road gets very wide there. And at that point, this car came to an instant halt. I didn't do anything. The brakes just locked solid. Luckily, I was going left anyhow, so I was in the left-hand lane. I got out the car, didn't know what to do. I walked up the hill to Louis Botha Avenue, I got on a bus, went into Joburg to a place called Juta's. Juta's, I think they still exist. And they sold technical books, mainly for universities. And I found a book called Porsche Technical Manual by a guy called Henry Elfrink. I then hopped on the bus again. I went down south of Joburg, Elof Street Extension. There's a company called Terry's. Terry's sold tools. I bought a box of hazard spanners. I hopped on the bus again, back to Houghton Drive, never having held a spanner in my life before. And I sat in the middle of the flippin' road. I took the wheel off to find that the lining of the brake shoe had come off and slipped around and jammed the brake solid. So I can say that thank you to this old car for starting me out as a wannabe Porsche mechanic. So, as I say, this thing was particularly crude. My God, I didn't even realize it had spot lamps on the nose. I'm just noticing that now. Actually, I don't think it did. I think I had it when this bottom right-hand corner. I don't remember those spotlights at all. So by now, I had a decent job and I had a company car. So I thought I'd treat myself to something better. I looked around for an A, the same as Mervyn's. I found one in Sasolburg. Only problem, as you can see on the left there, it was light ivory. Not a very sporting color, I thought. So as you can see, I had it changed to ruby red.
What is it? Current? The current trade?
No. This was done by Weinberg panel beaters. I don't know who remembers Weinberg panel. They were the panel beaters back in the day.
His father.
Yes. Oh, das ist Weinberg.
Is that so?
Yeah.
Was that your dad?
Yes.
My father Hans,
Yes.
yeah.
Good.
Did he do a decent job?
Well, you can see it's beautiful.
Bobby, can you remember what you paid for the car?
Yes, 600 rand.
That's good. It was big money then. It was
Sorry?
a lot of money.
It was. I only earned 80 rand a month. I'll tell you a little story that happened in the yard at Weinberg Panel Beaters while your dad was looking around the car to quote me. One of his people came up, and this guy, he wasn't a South African, he was some foreigner, and he was getting hell of excited about something. And your father said, "Excuse me." And they went across to the nose of a car which this fellow was fiddling with. And they measured, it was a Ferrari nose, it actually came from a 275 GTB. And what this fellow was complaining about to your dad was, this had just arrived from Italy, incidentally. They just opened the packing case. And he was complaining that the recess in the nose where the Ferrari badge went was not dead center. It was off by about 15 millimeters. So Mervyn and I at a later stage, slightly later, we moved from our respective flats. I was living in Hillbrow. He was in Germiston. We moved to a small holding out in the country, which is now called Pine Slopes. The exact location, and I say for those that know Johannesburg, there's now a shop there called Hirsch's. That is the exact property. There were 2 cottages. We sort of were separated by about 20 meters of grass. And he would work on his at night, and I would work on mine at night. Everything was done on my dining room table. I was a bachelor. This is the front of the carport here on the right. That's my white Speedster. We're coming to that now. So, just can you show me the love affair slide? Okay. I used to buy motoring magazines, as I'm sure a lot of you did and still do. 2 of the premier magazines in those years were Road and Track, and another one, Car and Driver. Car and Driver had an article about this particular Speedster. And and the heading or the title of this article was called Love Affair with a Bathtub. And this was actually the first time I'd ever seen a Speedster. And of course, there were other photographs of this car in the article with the top up. And what really appealed to me was that gun slit look it had when the top was erected. So I had to have one. I thought this was absolutely the coolest thing I'd ever seen. So not long afterwards, I was at a race meeting at Kyalami, and on the infield, lo and behold, there was a Speedster, the first one I'd ever seen in the flesh. I stuck a note under his windscreen wipers. If you want to sell, contact me. A week later, I owned a Speedster. And you can see a common thread with me. Every car I owned, I took the bumpers off. I thought those bumpers were very ugly, especially the ones with the American overriders and that sort of stuff. Yes, you're right. God, I love driving this car. The beautiful coupe that I had just stood there. I never touched it. Bottom left-hand corner, you can see the cottage there. No, actually, that's the main house. The bottom area is Mervin's part. Something that bothered me about this car, but obviously I didn't know whether it was common or uncommon, was something called scuttle shake. For people who don't know what I'm meaning, that means that the door and the windscreen area are continually moving. I thought maybe this is a normal thing. An incident that happened to me when I still had this car, being a bachelor, I couldn't cook. So I either ate Viennas or buns, or now and again I treated myself to a meal. And in those years, there were no restaurants out here. This was miles out in the country. The closest restaurant was at a place called Sloane Square, which still exists today, and the restaurant still exists. I went to eat there, parked this car outside. I came out after my dinner, and there was a business card under my windscreen, under my wipers. It read, "If you're interested to start a Porsche club, contact me." This gentleman's name was Hein Smit. He lived in Bryanston, Wilton Avenue. So I went along there. He asked me, invited me to his house, and there was one other fellow there by the name of Terence Playden. I would guess this was probably earlier, 68, late 68 maybe. So we decided it would be of interest to form this Porsche club. And we sort of agreed that we would contact as many Porsche people as we knew and meet again in 2 weeks' time. And what you're looking at there is probably the very first gathering of and Eddie has told me it's the second Porsche club, because apparently there was one in the 60s which I think fizzled out. Yeah. Can you see that you got 4 speedsters in that picture? I mean, Jan Els is one of them. Obviously, the white one is me. There was a youngster by the name of Brebner and Johan Els. I think the coupe that you see in the top right next to the tree, is that blue? That's probably Terence Playden's car, which is a 56. Yeah. No, it's here. It belongs to, what's his name? He races with, who's the V8 guy? He raced the speedboats, man. Lindenberg.
Not Lindenberg, the other guy. Finter.
Yeah. It belongs to him now. Yeah. Jerk Venter.
That's Turkey, was it not?
Yes. Yes. He's got it. He's got it.
Yeah.
Are they all right in drive?
Yes.
All right-hand drive. No, even his was right-hand drive. In the foreground, bottom right here, you see 1911 and 1912. Gentleman's name is Axel Klenk, and his friend's name was Jerikovic. What's the name of his butcher? Siemens Butcher. Okay, you can see that this poor guy's driveway is full to capacity of cars, can almost take no more. So we decided to meet again in a month's time at my place out in the country again. Goodness me, that on the right is me. Can you see the flares? I don't know. The coupe just behind me, that belongs to Johnny Menezes. And we had another very strange gentleman who thought matte black looked nice. So you can see what he's done to his car there. Everything was blacked out. Really? I think I have to tell you, all right, I'll tell you a bit later, about a matte black story. You know, the enthusiasm amongst these guys was unbelievable. All we wanted to do was talk about Porsches. It was quite crazy. And although we met formally every 2 weeks, there was not one weekend that went by without some of these guys pitching up at my place there just to talk again.
What's the clipboard you were holding there?
I think that what you're looking at is the very first Concours. What's the name of the little Portuguese guy that Alfred Gomez owned this 68 S. It was one of the first, well, it was the first S in our club. I don't know. I told somebody earlier, he is the man who is responsible for me never having a child. He brought his children to the meeting, and the way they behaved, I resolved never to have kids. No, but they ripped out some plants I planted in the morning.
That was a conquest. That was Venice is a sea. Or that's so far from the-
That's right. That's right. So the club grew very quickly, and we had a nice decal made, which everyone could affix to the glass in their motor car. Is that so? And you can see the business card we printed, which we would slip under the windscreen of any parked car or any guy that we happened to. I regularly used to stop people. You know, you stick your hand out the window. Well, first of all, we all greeted each other, which Porsche people don't seem to do anymore. And I used to stop people and hand them that card. So Mervyn, because he now had this 4-cam in this A, he knew of and dealt with this gentleman, Al Gibson, which Werner has already mentioned. And Al Gibson is standing next to the Elva in that picture. Al Gibson was an absolute legend in motor racing circles in this country. He worked out of his little garage in Edenvale. And I used to visit him quite regularly, and he very kindly agreed to refresh the engine in my Speedster. I was a rep in those days, had plenty of time, so I used to drop in at this guy's place at least 2-3 times a week, because there were a continuous stream of South African racing personalities popping in there. I mean, I met the whole lot of them, Doug Seruria, Bobby Althoff, Charlton, you name it. They all came there to have work done. We're talking about the era of the Cosworth engine, for example. The Cosworth engine was sold to anybody who wanted to buy an engine. You could buy a Cosworth engine. But one of the things you had to do was you signed a document that if it needed any attention, it had to be returned to England. You were not allowed to do anything to that motor, internally I'm talking about. But you know, South Africans don't listen. And Al opened, I'm not sure whose engine it was, whether it was John Love's or Dave Charlton's, and he saw things that he thought could be done better. And he did them better. But of course, eventually that motor blew up completely and was returned to Cosworth in England. And they saw these modifications. They weren't too happy. But I was told that they used some of those modifications in their later developments. In any case, on one of the visits to Al's house, this is his driveway you're looking at, I see this peculiar looking motor car here. He explained to me that it was a Carrera Abarth Porsche. And of course, the minute you say Porsche to me, my ears prick up. more or less the same time, I happened to ask Al about that scuttle shake that I was describing to you just now. I wanted to know, did he think it was normal? No, he didn't know, but he said to me, listen, this fellow that owns this Abarth is sending his speedster in this week. If I pop around, I can drive it. So the car came, there it is. I drove it, no scuttle shake. That photograph, incidentally, is in the middle of the Karoo. If you can look at the scenery in the background. We drove from Johannesburg down to Wilderness. Can you see my dog there? I tell you, we absolutely fried in the sun because we could not drive with a top up at any sort of speed. But that was the hideous color that this car was when I bought it. Incidentally, in the records that I've got, if you look at engine numbers and colors of different years, they only made one green Speedster for that year, and that's it. That was socks. This little dog used to stand on the shelf behind the seats, 1 foot on the passenger seat, 1 foot on the driver's seat, and he knew how to corner. He knew how to lean. And once again, you can see I've taken the bumpers off. So as I say, I drove this car, no scuttle shake. And there were many other features of this car which just made me want it. It was absolutely unmolested. Just as an example for people who've got convertibles, you know, you've got these lift dot fasteners which hold the top down. Where they screwed into the body, each one is supposed to have a small, clear nylon washer underneath one. And they were all there. This car was in absolute perfect condition.
Where's the door beading?
I don't know. I can't remember what happened there.
In any case, missing in the photograph, perhaps the light or something. Light.
No, I think it was gone. Any case, I wanted it. So I phoned up this gentleman. I said, I'm interested in your Speedster. He said, okay, come and talk to me. I have to tell you a funny story about this guy. His name was Van der Merwe. He lived in a house in Hillbrow. I'm going to say that again, a house in Hillbrow. This guy was such a poople. When the developers came to build these blocks of flats, he thought he's going to be clever and hold out. So they built these flats around him. So this tiny house was surrounded by these 20, 30-story blocks of flats. Any case, I said, I want to buy the Speedster. Yeah, he said, I'll sell it to you. But if you want it, you've got to take both of my cars. You know, just remember what I'm going to say now in the context of the years that it was. I mean, who the hell wants to buy an old racing car? So I reluctantly took it home because I really wanted that Speedster.
How much did you pay?
I paid 2,000 Rand for both.
How much did you sell the other?
But that car was, obviously by the time I got it home, it never had an engine because when you see it standing in Al's driveway, it was there for a complete engine rebuild. So I brought it home, no engine. I took the engine out of my white Speedster. I put it into that Abarth just so I could drive it. I didn't like it at all. It was so shockingly made. You know, and I say that in context, you know, having worked on my coupe and my Speedster, you see how beautifully everything is put together. And then you see this piece of crap. So I didn't want it. Then I got the bright idea, why don't I take the 4-cam and put it in that Speedster? So I took everything out of this car that I could that belonged to the 4-cam, which included the most beautiful racing bucket seats, which are much deeper than a normal Speedster seat. The 10,000 RPM rev counter, the God knows what, 350 kilometers an hour speedometer, all that type of stuff. I took it out and I sold it to a gentleman by the name of Jan Els. I think some of you guys know him. So Al Gibson very kindly rebuilt the motor for me. Keep in mind that in those years, no spares whatsoever available for a 4-cam. So anything that was broken, you had to make. My piston and barrels were damaged, so he relined the pistons with cast iron bores, and I don't know what else he did. But there on the left-hand side, we're just about to install the motor into my car.
Tell them who owns the car today?
Yes, that comes at a bit later in the. So I say here, I'm just backtracking ever so slightly. All of a sudden, I owned 4 blooming Porsches. And I sold 2 of them to fund the rebuilding of this motor. I sold the Speedster. I sold the Abarth. The Speedster I sold to a gentleman who owned a garage in Commissioner Street called Maranello Motors. I think Rod Hausler probably knew him. Yeah. This particular Maranello Motors always had a 356A parked outside. And when I was looking for members, I stopped there one day and I went inside, and this fellow was working on a GTB on a lift. He was a huge Hollander. And I walked up to him and I said, please, can I speak to the guy who owns the 356A? And he turned to me and he said, that's me. And I was shocked. I said to him, how can you own a Speedster when you're working on Ferraris? And he said to me, listen here. He said, that's a motor car. This is a piece of shit. In any case, he bought my Speedster from me. He painted it yellow. I don't know whatever happened to that car. I see one of the things that I write here about the Abarth body was how the water came pouring in when it rained. You know, the windows never fitted up to the body properly. It really was shockingly built. I've just read an article in an old magazine called Gemund, which I found in the old motor shop or old car shop in Jewel Street. And there's an article there about the Abarth, and they reckon that one man built the left-hand side and another man built the right-hand side. And it was all done by eye. So now we're talking about me building this speedster. I'd suddenly become very sort of originality conscious. I had just about everything I needed off the Abarth to recreate a 4-cam speedster. But the one piece that I overlooked when I sold the Abarth was the little coolers which sit in the nose. And they run from the engine bay right along through the wheel arches to the front. I started hunting around for these. Frans, maybe you can help me. I don't know how I came across, but I found another very famous 356A GS GT, which belonged to a guy called Ian Fraser Jones. This was an A coupe, aluminium bonnet, aluminium boot lid, aluminium doors. It was a out-and-out racing coupe. It was down in a basement, 4 stories down in Hillbrow. Do you remember how we found it? I can't. You were working there. Well, maybe you told me about it. I don't know. Any case, this car still had, the motor was long gone, but it still had those coolers in it and the pipes. So I'm such a rich oak, I buy it. I take it home, I take out the pipes and the front coolers, and a week later I sell it to a guy called Don van Staden. Maybe somebody knows him. I don't know, I think he might still have it today. But that was quite a rare coupe. You know, again I say, who the hell wants to keep an old Porsche racing car? That was the thinking in those years. Nobody wanted them. So I got this thing almost to a stage where it was indistinguishable from a genuine factory 4-cam. The only, actually, I think I need to point out to you that the Abarth, I don't know why, was fitted with a 2-litre 4-cam. They came out standard with a 1600. Most of them were raced as 1600s. And most of them were raced with normal, or let's call it racing drum brakes. This particular Abarth of mine had what was called annular disc brakes. The story goes that Porsche was too schnoep to pay the royalties to, I think it was Dunlop, for the ATE disc brakes. So they designed their own, which were far too complicated. And this Abarth had the annular disc brakes as well as being a 2-litre. This 2-litre motor is the same motor you see in this picture over here. In road-going trim, it's supposedly 130 din horsepower. In racing trim, like the Abarth had, supposedly in the region of 180 horsepower. I don't know if we're going to see, but the exhaust that I made, funny enough, as I turned into this Barnard Street, I see the company that made it for me. It's called De Graaf Undercar, and it's here on the corner. They were in Pretoria. They made me this exhaust, which was virtually straight through, but it had a muffler. So I never put it on a dyno. I guesstimate maybe 150 horsepower in that speedster. The one feature that I still didn't have for that speedster were some better brakes. At this stage, it still had the normal skinny little drum brakes that came out as standard. And then I heard, and I'm not sure how I heard, but I heard that Lindsay Saker were doing their, I don't know if it's annual or biannual, whatever it is, where they scrap parts. And these parts are scrapped, as far as I know, under instruction from the Porsche factory. They call it redundant stock. The guy who then ran the parts division of Lindsay Saker, who now is one of the guys at Carrera Motors, Hans Schober. I'm sure many of you might know him. He got hold of me and he said, listen, we're about to scrap some Spider racing brakes, brand new. So I hurried along there. These things are, what would you say, Frans, almost 2/3 of the width wider. 60 millimeters wide, beautiful backing plates with air scoops and the actual shoes, aluminium shoes with racing compound linings on them. So now the car was absolutely complete. The only thing that distinguished it from a genuine car would have been the VIN number. Mervyn and I now both had these 2 4-cams, and we used them on a Sunday afternoon. The two of us would head out direction Hartbeespoort and then on to Magaliesburg, a big loop, and back. And we're talking again here, 60s. The roads were empty. And we went at crazy illegal speeds. Slowly, people heard about this, and we started to do it on a Sunday morning. Have you got it? No. There we go. So there you've got the 4-cam in the front. Middle one is front stangel. I'm not sure if you had your 6-cylinder yet. I think it was still push rod. And at the back is also a push rod thing. Sunday morning, we found out that all the motorbike guys went to a place called Stuyverlane. And this bottom right-hand picture is Stuyverlane. Go again.
Why are those all left-hand drive?
Hmm?
There's a left-hand drive.
It's probably the slide.
Right as well, that's all right and right.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. It's probably the slide, yeah.
Yeah.
The bumper lights on your Speedster, did you put those on?
Yes, you know, if you look at the replica outside here, it's still the one thing that I cannot stand about that horrible chrome square thing. My car outside has got a 550 tail light. This has got they were on the bumper, and I got rid of that hideous thing, and I put this thing on here. Okay, let's go again. Yeah, we've missed a few. Look, that's the tunnel at Hartbeespoort Dam. This was on one of the Porsche Club jaunts that we did. Again, you can see I'm in a Speedster. There's two in view. We did some fabulous things as the Porsche Club in those years, I think. We did treasure hunts. We did gymkhanas. We did concourse. We did, yeah. Have a look there, bottom right-hand corner. Now the breakfast run has become quite popular, and we regularly had 25, 30, sometimes even more motor cars.
How many speedsters were around at that time?
I reckon in the club, probably 5 or 6. Yeah, this is the Krugersdorp hill climb. No, this is where we did it only as the Porsche Club. Left-hand corner is a dear friend of ours who's now departed. Right-hand is a very famous VW mechanic, Werner Anders. The Abarth there, you can see Jan Els put chrome wheels on. He thought that was very hot. That's a gymkhana. And right-hand bottom right-hand corner is a gentleman by the name of Franz Zepek, who took a 912 and he put a V8 in it. And that's him going up the hill.
Is it the hill where you start? Where
Interest, yeah.
Interest.
Yeah.
Ah,
That's the
okay.
hill.
Coming down.
Coming down. Yeah.
Yeah. So you saw pictures of the very first concourse in my driveway. The second concourse we had at Emerentia Dam. By then we'd got a little bit fancier. We made a floating trophy. There it is on the left. And the smaller trophy on the right, I've still got at home today. And the 4-cam was lucky enough to win on that day. So I just want to go back to the breakfast run. By now, a fellow by the name of John Bishop had taken over as our president. He was a bit of a fuddy-duddy. He never really partook in the crazy driving. But what he did do for us, he went ahead, he had a walkie-talkie, and he would radio back to us, especially on the Magaliesberg back road, that there were no cops. And then we would all drive like idiots. Top right-hand corner is, in fact, the top 3 slides are the hotel parking lot at Magaliesberg Hotel. Top right-hand corner is when, to my knowledge, the very first 930 Turbo came into the country. Yeah, Etienne de Villiers. Oh, is that so? And I remember a pink Carrera, and I think he's present here today. The bottom 2 slides is another outing that we had, and I think it was a treasure hunt, and we stopped at Jan Els's house somewhere in Randburg, and you see a few cars there. Let's go to the next one. Yeah. Around about this time, I was contacted by somebody in the sports car club, and they obviously contacted Frans as well. They wanted to start this historic racing business. Franz agreed, I didn't. The 904 that you see at the bottom, a fellow by the name of David Cohen. And they all had great fun doing historic racing. I see there's a Morgan in this shot there behind Franz. And I think that Morgan still races in historics today. Am I right? Unfortunately, David Cohen took this car with him. I think he emigrated to the United States. Canada. I think I have to tell you a small story about David Cohen, please. When I was visiting Al Gibson on one occasion, Bobby Althoff was there, and I asked him whatever happened to his AC Cobra, and he told me it's at home, standing on blocks. So I said, would you be interested in selling it? He said, yeah, you can have it, 2,000 Rand. He said, but there's nothing in it. He says, I've taken everything out of it, engine, gearbox, brakes, everything is in my Capri Piranha. He used to race a Capri Piranha. So I could have had I think it was one of 7 genuine 7-liter factory works Cobras for 2,000 Rand. I could have. Let's go to the next one. Okay, this is I can't quite remember why we went to Kyle Army Ranch, but we started to have meetings at Kyle Army Ranch. And on this particular day, a gentleman pitched up with a 2.7 RS. And supposedly it was the first one in South Africa. And of course, we thought it was fitting to pose the 2 Carreras on the lawn.
Who owned that?
Bauer. Sten Bauer.
Dodos.
No, Sten Bauer. They had a clothing shop in Commissioner. Wasn't it called?
Dodos?
No. Dodos something was
Remember those?
There were a hell of a lot of cars here on this day. Unfortunately, they're not all visible. Let's have the next one. Yeah. There was just one other story I think I must relate to you. We were absolutely Porsche crazy back then. I mean, I used to eat, drink, and sleep Porsche. One of the things we did at my cottage when all these people used to pitch up, we would show movies. Remember, there was no internet, there was no television. We used to hire movies, or we used to get movies from the factory, from Lindsay Saker, showing us how Porsches were built. And then there was one movie that we actually hired, starring a guy called Paul Newman. He played the part of a detective called Harper, and he drove a blue Speedster with a red door. I think the door was red primer, eh? And this Speedster you saw repeatedly throughout the movie. And we replayed this movie over and over and over again. Around about the same time, I worked for a big company called Gallo Africa. Gallo sold records, LP records. They also had another division that sold allied products like musical instruments. I was in that division. And they started to branch out. They took on things like hi-fi equipment. JVC was one of them. Toshiba was another one. Mulinex, which was something for the kitchen. And one Friday evening, the sales manager put down on the table a very slim box. He opened it up, and there was this range of watches, which he explained he'd taken on the agency. It was a Swiss brand called Orfina. And one of the watches inside this box is this watch that I've got on my wrist now. First of all, what attracted me to it was this matte black, because matte black was virtually unheard of. This watch just blew me away. And then I looked closer at it, and I saw Porsche design. And I don't know how many of you know, but Butzi Porsche, they kicked the family out of Porsche at one stage, and he started this company called Porsche Design. This was his very first product. So I asked the sales manager, how many did we bring in? He said 20. Well, I tell you, the minute that sales meeting finished, I started to phone. All 20 were sold within 10 minutes. Frans has got one. I don't know if Rod has got one. No. But in any case, everybody in the Porsche Club bought. I don't know. It was for nothing. It was. No. 68. I'm telling you. 69, I started selling records. I promise you. 68. Yeah. Any case, I hope you enjoyed a couple of memories.